The Vren homeworld was a large planet with red deserts and silver cities. 12 billion people lived there. It was the heart of an empire that had existed for over 1,000 years, built on conquest and pride and the absolute belief that strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe. The Vren had never been invaded. No enemy had ever reached their home. Their cities had never been bombed. Their people had never known the fear of looking up at the sky and wondering if death was coming. That changed on a Tuesday. The human fleet arrived in the Vren home system and took positions around the planet. 12,000 warships, thousands of drone swarms, and 300 berserker vessels formed a ring so tight that nothing could leave or enter the planet without human permission. Commander Park Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the Hwayong and looked at the Vren homeworld on his screen. Cities full of families, children, old people who had never held a weapon. People who had probably never even heard of New Busan or the other human colonies that had been turned to glass. Tae-ho had the power to do to this planet exactly what the Vren had done to humanity's colonies. The planet crackers were charged and ready. One order, and the Vren homeworld would split apart like an egg. 12 billion lives ended in minutes. Eye for an eye, multiplied by 1,000. Nobody in the fleet would have questioned the order. After what the Vren had done, most of them would have cheered. But Tae-ho did not give the order. He stood very still, looking at the planet, and he thought about what it meant to be human. This was the moment. Not the battle, not the weapons, not the fleet. This moment, right here, where a man with the power to destroy a world chose what to do with that power. This was what separated humans from the thing the Vren thought they were. This was the line, and Tae-ho knew which side of it he needed to stand on. He opened a communication channel to the Vren government. "This is Commander Park Tae-ho of the Human Defense Fleet. Your military is destroyed. Your territory is under our control. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. If you surrender, your people will live. Your planet will not be harmed. Your civilian population will be protected. You have my word, and the word of every human being alive." He paused. "If you do not surrender, we will not destroy your world. We are not you, but we will remain here, and your planet will be blockaded until the end of time. Nothing will enter. Nothing will leave. You will live, but you will live alone, cut off from the rest of the universe forever. The choice is yours." The hour passed slowly. On the bridge, nobody spoke. Pilot Im Soo-jin sat in her fighter in the formation ring, her engines idling, her weapons powered down. She stared at the red planet below and thought about the people on its surface. Some of them were probably looking up right now, seeing the human ships in their sky, feeling the same fear that the people of New Busan had felt in their last moments. She wanted to hate them. Part of her did. But another part of her, the part that was most human, just felt tired. Sergeant Ko Ji-won was on one of the troop carriers, ready to lead ground forces if needed. He had not slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the black glass where New Busan had been. He saw the woman, holding the child who was not breathing. He saw the old man, staring at nothing. He had carried those images across the stars, through every battle, all the way to this moment. And now he sat in a metal room surrounded by soldiers and waited for the war to end. In the medical bay of the Baiko, Shin Eun-ji was treating wounded crew members. The human casualties across the entire campaign had been remarkably small. The Vren had been so outmatched that most of the fighting had been one-sided. But there were still injuries, still people in pain, and Eun-ji took care of each one with the same steady hands and quiet voice that she always had. When a young crew member asked her if she thought the Vren would surrender, she said, "I hope so. I am tired of hearing people scream." The Vren surrendered with 12 minutes to spare. Their leader appeared on the communication channel. An old Vren, with gray scales and eyes that looked like they had not blinked in days. He spoke the words of unconditional surrender in a voice that cracked and broke halfway through. Behind him, visible through a window, the silver cities of the Vren homeworld stretched to the horizon, untouched, whole, still standing because a human had chosen to let them stand. Admiral B. Sung-ho received the surrender on Earth. He listened to every word. When it was done, he gave a single order to every human ship, every station, every weapon in the fleet. Cease fire, effective immediately. All weapons to stand by. All berserker ships to shut down. It is over. The berserker ships powered down, their hungry systems going quiet one by one. The drone swarms returned to their carriers and folded themselves into storage. The planet crackers discharged their energy into empty space, great beams of light that shot into the darkness and faded into nothing. The human fleet remained in position, but stopped moving, stopped fighting, stopped being the thing it had become. It was like watching a storm decide to become calm. Director Cha Yuna was watching from the vaults on Earth's moon. She saw the weapons go offline, the systems shut down, the terrible machines return to their sleep. When the last berserker ship powered off, she walked to the main vault door and began the process of sealing it again. It would take days to move everything back inside, to check every system, to lock every door. But she did not mind. She wanted these things back in the dark where they belonged. As she worked, she whispered something that nobody heard. 200 years. Please let it be 200 more. Captain Han Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the Baiko and watched the ceasefire take effect. He had been awake the 3 days. He had watched his species transform from the friendly, quiet neighbors of the galaxy into something that could tear an empire apart in less than a week. He had seen the weapons and the warships and the berserker machines. He had seen the fury in the eyes of people who had never been angry before. And now he watched all of it being put away, carefully, deliberately, like a person putting a dangerous animal back in its cage. Nari stood beside him. She looked as tired as he felt. "What happens now?" she asked. "We go back to patrol," Do-hyun said. "We check on mining stations, we make sure cargo ships are safe." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Can we really just go back to being what we were?" Do-hyun thought about it. He thought about New Busan, about the green oceans that were gone, about the children who would never play in the narrow streets again. He thought about the vaults, and the berserker ships, and the sound of Sujin laughing on the open channel as she flew through enemy fire. He thought about Taeho, standing in front of the Vren homeworld, with the power to end 12 billion lives, and choosing not to. "We were always this," he said quietly. "Both things, the kindness and the fury. We just choose which one to show, and we are choosing kindness again. That is what makes us human." The Baiko turned away from the Vren homeworld and set course for the outer colonies. Behind it, the fleet began to break apart, ships heading back to their posts, their hidden bases, their quiet lives. The vaults would be sealed. The weapons would go back to sleep. The ghosts would disappear into their normal jobs and wait again, hoping they would never be needed. Across the galaxy, every species updated the same file. It was a short file, kept in the most secure databases of every civilization, and it contained a single warning that would be passed down through generations for as long as the stars burned. Do not touch the humans. They are kind, they are patient, they will smile at you, and help you, and trade with you, and never raise their voice. But if you hurt them, if you take from them the things they love, they will show you what they really are. And what they really are is the most dangerous thing this galaxy has ever seen. Not because of their weapons, not because of their ships, but because they are the only species that can destroy everything, knows it, and chooses every single day not to. That is the most frightening thing of all. The stars were quiet again, and somewhere on the Baiko, Captain Han Do-hyun finally went to sleep, and for the first time in days, He did not dream of fire. He dreamed of green oceans and white sand and children laughing. And he held on to that dream as tightly as he could. The Vren Dominion expected a response. They had planned for it. Their military leaders had studied humanity for years, looked at their small fleet, their unarmed colonies, their soft diplomacy, and they had concluded that the human response would be slow, weak, and emotional. They expected scattered counterattacks from patrol ships. They expected desperate calls for help to the Galactic Council. They expected negotiations within a week and surrender within a month. What they got was Commander Park Taeho. Taeho had spent 20 years in the fleet doing nothing interesting. He had run supply routes, managed training programs, and written reports that nobody read. He was a quiet man who kept to himself and rarely smiled. Most people who worked with him thought he was boring. What they did not know was that Taeho had been selected at the age of 22 for a program that officially did not exist. He had spent 5 years in a classified facility studying war. Not the polite, theoretical kind taught at military academies. The real kind. The old kind. The kind that humanity had practiced on itself for 10,000 years before it learned to be civilized. He had studied every battle, every campaign, every act of destruction that humans had ever committed. And he had been trained to do all of it better and faster, and with technology that the old warriors could not have imagined. There were others like him, a few hundred, scattered across the fleet, hidden in normal jobs, waiting. They called themselves ghosts, because they existed in the spaces between what humanity showed the galaxy and what humanity truly was. When the vaults opened, the ghosts received a single message, one word: rise. Taeho took command of the first assault fleet, 12,000 warships, including 300 berserker vessels and 50,000 drone swarms. It was a force so large that when it moved through faster-than-light travel, the energy wake disrupted communications across 3 star systems. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Hwarion, and looked at the tactical display showing the Vren border territories. 7 major systems, 40 military stations, 300 warships defending the outer line. Time to contact? He asked. 4 hours, his tactical officer reported. Taeho nodded. Tell the fleet. No warning shots, no broadcasts, no mercy. They killed 8 million of our people in their sleep. We go in silent, and we do not stop until they are broken. The Vren detected the human fleet 2 hours before it arrived. Their sensors picked up the energy signature and immediately flagged it as an error, because the readings were too large to be real. No species in the galaxy had a fleet that size. By the time they confirmed the readings were accurate, the first wave was already dropping out of faster-than-light travel on top of them. The battle for the Vren outer systems lasted 11 hours. Military experts across the galaxy would later study it and use words like overwhelming and systematic and total. But those words were too clean for what actually happened. The berserker ships hit first. They came in fast, faster than anything the Vren had ever seen, and they did not behave like normal warships. Normal warships targeted engines and weapons and shields. The berserkers targeted everything. They tore through the Vren defensive line like animals through a fence, firing in every direction, adapting to enemy tactics in real time, learning and evolving with every second of combat. They could not be predicted. They could not be reasoned with. They had no crews to tire, no morale to break. They were pure, mechanical rage. Behind the berserkers came the drone swarms. 50,000 clouds of tiny machines, each one no bigger than a fist, each one carrying enough explosive force to crack a ship's hull. They moved like water, flowing around defenses, finding gaps, pouring into weaknesses. Vren ships that survived the berserker assault were consumed by the swarms, covered in thousands of tiny detonations that ate through their armor layer by layer. And behind the drones came the human warships, the real ones, the ones from the vaults. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons firing with a precision that was almost beautiful. Every shot hit exactly where it was aimed. Every maneuver was calculated to maximize damage and minimize exposure. They fought the way humans had always fought, when they stopped pretending to be nice. Efficiently, relentlessly, without a single wasted movement. Pilot Im Sujin flew a strike fighter in the third wave. She was 28 years old, small enough that she had to adjust her seat to reach the controls, and she was grinning so wide that her cheeks hurt. Her fighter was fast and light, and armed with weapons that could cut through a Vren cruiser like paper. She dove into the middle of the Vren formation, spinning between enemy ships, firing at point-blank range, laughing on the open communications channel. "Come on!" she shouted as she destroyed a Vren gunship with a single shot. "Is this all you have? You killed 8 million people, and this is what you brought to the fight?" The Vren commanders could hear her. They could hear all the human pilots. The communications channels were full of humans talking, laughing, shouting to each other like they were playing a game. It was terrifying. The Vren had expected fear, desperation, the sounds of a species fighting for survival. Instead, they heard joy. Not the joy of cruelty, something worse. The joy of a species that had been holding itself back for 200 years, and had finally been given permission to stop. The outer systems fell in 11 hours. The Vren lost 208 warships, 19 military stations, and more than 100,000 soldiers. The humans lost 37 ships and no stations. The ratio was so extreme that when the reports reached the Vren homeworld, the military high command did not believe them. They demanded confirmation. They got it. And then they demanded it again, because the numbers still did not make sense. Taeho did not stop at the outer systems. He pushed deeper into Vren territory, taking system after system. The Vren tried to regroup. They pulled their remaining fleets together and formed a defensive line at their core worlds. 700 ships arranged in a formation that had never been broken in Vren military history. Taeho broke it in 6 hours. He did it by sending the berserker ships in first, as always, but this time he programmed them to do something new. Instead of attacking the Vren ships directly, they flew past them at maximum speed and began attacking the supply stations behind the defensive line. The Vren fleet turned to protect their supplies, and the moment they broke formation, the human warships hit them from every direction at once. It was over before the Vren commanders even understood what had happened. The Vren government sent an emergency message to the Galactic Council. They demanded intervention. They demanded that the Council stop the humans, declare a ceasefire, impose sanctions, do something. The message was desperate and angry, and full of accusations that humanity was using weapons that violated galactic law. The Council received the message and held a vote. Every species, every representative, every single vote said the same thing. No. The Council's official response was 3 sentences long. The Vren Dominion was warned repeatedly not to engage in hostilities with humanity. The Vren Dominion chose to ignore these warnings and launched an unprovoked attack on civilian populations. The Galactic Council will not intervene in the consequences of that decision. Behind closed doors, several council members said what they were really thinking. One of them, the representative of a species that had existed for 10,000 years, said it most clearly. We told them that the humans were not weak. We told them that the smiling and the kindness and the patience were not signs of a species that could not fight. They were signs of a species that was trying very, very hard not to. And now the Vren have given them a reason to stop trying. And there is nothing in this galaxy that can put that back in its box, except the humans themselves. On the Hwaryong, Taeho received word that the Council had refused to intervene. He showed no reaction. He had not expected them to help the Vren, and he would not have stopped if they had. He looked at the tactical display, where the path to the Vren homeworld was now open, and gave his next order. All ships, advance. We finish this. Sujin, still in her fighter, heard the order, and adjusted her course toward the Vren core. Her grin had faded into something harder and quieter. The joy of the first battle was gone. What was left was purpose. 8 million people. She carried that number with her like a weight, and she would carry it all the way to the end. The human fleet moved forward, and the stars themselves seemed to get out of the way. Admiral Bei Sun-ho sat alone in his office at Fleet Command on Earth. The room was dark, except for the blue glow of the screens in front of him. On those screens were the casualty reports. Numbers so large, they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like something else. Something that did not fit inside a normal mind. 8 million dead across 3 colony worlds. 8 million people who had been alive yesterday. 8 million names that would need to be carved into stone somewhere, if there was anyone left to carve them. Sung-ho read every report. He read them slowly. He looked at the images. He watched the recordings that Shin Unji had broadcast to the entire species. He saw the burning cities and the boiling oceans, and the black glass where towns had been. He listened to the last transmissions, the ones that ended in static. He took all of it in, every piece, and he let it settle into his bones. Then he leaned back in his chair, and he smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent his entire career preparing for something that everyone told him would never happen. And now it had happened, and all those years of quiet, patient work were about to mean something. Sung-ho picked up his communicator. "Get me Director Cha Yuna at the vaults." The vaults. Most humans did not know they existed. They were buried deep beneath the surface of 3 different moons, hidden behind layers of encryption and security so thick that even the Galactic Council had never found them. They were humanity's worst secret. Not the secret that humans had once been violent. Everyone knew that. The real secret was that humans had never stopped being good at violence. They had just chosen to stop practicing it. When humanity had first joined the galactic community 200 years ago, the leaders of that time had made a decision. They would be peaceful. They would be kind. They would earn their place among the stars through cooperation and trade and diplomacy. But they were not fools. They had spent thousands of years learning what the universe was really like, and they knew that kindness without strength was just an invitation for someone to hurt you. So they built the vaults. Inside the vaults was everything humanity had ever created for the purpose of destruction, plus everything they had imagined but never built, because the old wars had ended before they needed to. Planet crackers that could split a world in half. Swarm fleets of 1 million drones that moved like a single mind. Berserker ships that could fight without crews, running on systems so aggressive that they had to be kept powered down because they would attack anything that moved. Weapons that worked on the atomic level, pulling matter apart 1 atom at a time. Weapons that bent space itself, crushing everything within a target area into a point smaller than a grain of sand. Every generation, a small group of engineers and scientists was chosen to maintain the vaults, to update the technology, to make sure everything still worked. They were the most carefully selected people in human civilization. They had to be brilliant, and they had to be stable, because the things they worked with were capable of ending worlds. Director Cha Yuna was the current head of this group, and when her communicator rang at 4 in the morning, she already knew why. She had seen the broadcasts, she had watched the colonies burn, and she had already started walking toward the main vault door before Sung-ho even spoke. "Director Cha," the Admiral said, "open the vaults, all of them." Yuna's hand was on the door panel. "Authorization code?" Sunlight falls on an empty field. There was a pause. That code had never been used. It had been created 200 years ago, passed down from one fleet commander to the next, each one hoping they would never have to say it. It meant total release. Everything in the vaults. No restrictions. No limits. Confirmed, Yuna said. Her voice was steady, but her hand was shaking slightly as she pressed it to the panel. The door was 3 meters thick, made of materials that did not exist in nature. It opened slowly, and the air that came out was cold and smelled like metal and old electricity. She walked inside. The lights came on, one section at a time, revealing row after row after row of machines and weapons and ships, stretching so far back that the end of the vault disappeared into darkness. Everything was perfectly maintained. Everything was ready. It had been ready for 200 years, waiting for a day that most people prayed would never come. Yuna started the power-up sequence. Screens that had been dark for decades lit up with data. Engines that had never been fired outside of testing began to hum. Drone bays opened, revealing thousands of machines packed tight like sleeping insects. Berserker ship cores started their boot cycles, and even behind their containment fields, Yuna could feel them pressing outward, hungry, eager. She stood in the middle of it all and watched humanity's hidden teeth come out of the darkness. She was an engineer. She loved building things. She had spent her career maintaining weapons she hoped would rust into nothing. But she was also human. And something deep inside her, something ancient and honest, looked at all of this and felt a grim satisfaction. They have no idea what they just did, she said to no one. Back at Fleet Command, Admiral Sungho was already in the war room. Around him stood the senior officers of every human fleet, connected by secure channels from across the galaxy. They were all quiet. They were all waiting for him to speak. On the main screen behind him was the image of New Busan, before and after, the green oceans and the black glass, side by side. Sungho did not give a long speech. He did not need to. Everyone in the room had seen the same images. Everyone had heard the same screams. Everyone had felt the same thing when the silence fell. The Vren Dominion has attacked 3 human worlds without warning or provocation, he said. 8 million of our people are dead. They believe we will break. He paused and looked at every face in the room, one by one. We are going to show them what we are. On the bridge of the Baiko, Captain Han Do-hyun received new orders. He read them twice, because the first time he could not believe what he was seeing. The ship's weapon systems, sealed since the day it was launched, were to be unlocked. The crew was to be armed, and the Baiko was to join a fleet that was assembling at coordinates he had never seen before, a point in deep space where nothing was supposed to exist. When they arrived, Do-hyun understood. The point in deep space was a staging area, and it was already full of ships. Not the small patrol vessels and cargo escorts that made up the normal human fleet. These were warships, real warships. Ships he had never seen before, ships that had been hidden in the vaults and were now pouring out of storage by the thousands. They were dark and angular and covered in weapon systems that he could not even identify. They moved through space with a speed and precision that made his own ship look like a toy. Lieutenant Yoon Nari stood beside him, staring at the tactical display. There were so many ships that the display had to zoom out 3 times to show them all. How long were these down there? She whispered. 200 years, Do-hyun said, waiting. Nari looked at him. Did you know? No. He watched the warships forming up, thousands of them, moving into attack formation like a machine coming to life. But I think the Vren are about to find out. The fleet filled the darkness of space like a storm cloud building on the horizon. And at its center, the berserker ships were waking up, their systems running hot, their targeting arrays scanning in every direction, hungry for something to destroy. Humanity had smiled at the galaxy for 200 years. The smile was gone now. What was left underneath was something the galaxy had never seen. And the oldest species, the ones who had been watching since the beginning, closed their doors and turned off their lights and whispered to each other in the dark. "We warned them," they said. "We told them not to touch the humans." But the Vren had not listened. And now it was too late to listen. Now there was only what came next. The first bomb hit New Busan at exactly 3 in the morning, local time. Most of the 4 million people on the planet were asleep. They never got the chance to wake up properly. The Vren fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, 700 warships moving in perfect formation, and they had begun firing before anyone on the surface even knew they were there. The orbital strikes came down like rain made of light. Each one hit the ground with enough force to flatten everything within 10 kilometers. The green oceans turned to steam. The white sand beaches melted into glass. Whole towns disappeared in single flashes. The sound was so loud that people on the far side of the planet heard it as a deep, rolling thunder that did not stop. Sergeant Ko Ji-won was on the ground when it started. He had been visiting a training outpost on the northern coast, running a routine exercise with a small group of reserve soldiers. When the sky turned white, he did not freeze. He did not scream. Something old and deep inside him, something that came from 1,000 generations of people who had survived things they should not have survived, woke up in an instant. He grabbed the nearest person, pulled them into the underground shelter, and started shouting orders. "Get below! Everyone below! Move!" The shelter shook so hard that the walls cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling in thick clouds. Jihan could hear the strikes hitting the surface above them, one after another, each one closer than the last. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, turning everything a dull red. Around him, people were crying, praying, holding on to each other. He moved through them like a wall, calm on the outside, even though his heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his teeth. When the bombing paused, he went to the surface. What he saw broke something inside him that would never be fixed. The town was gone. Not damaged, not burning, gone. Where buildings had stood, there was only flat, black glass. The air smelled like burned metal, and something else, something sweet and terrible that he knew was the smell of people who had been alive 5 minutes ago. In the distance, the ocean was boiling. Great clouds of steam rose into a sky that was no longer blue, but a sick orange-brown color filled with ash. He found survivors. Not many. A woman holding a child who was no longer breathing. An old man sitting in the ruins of his house, staring at nothing. A group of teenagers who had been in a basement and crawled out through a crack in the concrete. Ji-hwan gathered them. He kept them moving. He did not let himself think about the numbers. He did not let himself count how many were missing. On the Baiko, Captain Han Do-han received the first distress signal, 12 minutes after the attack began. He was in his quarters when the alarm pulled him from sleep. He reached the bridge in under a minute, still pulling on his jacket, and what he saw on the screens made him stop in the doorway. New Busan was burning. The entire planet was covered in impact markers, so many that they overlapped into a solid mass of red. The colony's communication network was destroyed. Only a few scattered emergency beacons were still transmitting, and most of those were automated, which meant the people who had activated them were already dead. Lieutenant Yoon Nari was already at her station. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. 700 Vren warships. They hit the planet with orbital bombardment for 9 minutes straight. Estimated casualties. She paused. Her jaw tightened. Estimated casualties are above 3 million. 3 million people. Do-hyun gripped the edge of his console so hard his fingers went white. 3 million people who had been sleeping in their beds, dreaming about tomorrow. 3 million people who had done nothing wrong, who had never threatened anyone, who had just wanted to live their quiet lives on a pretty planet with green oceans. The Vren were not done. While the Baiko was still trying to process what had happened to New Busan, 2 more distress signals came in. Colony worlds on the edge of human space. The same pattern. Massive fleets appearing without warning. Orbital strikes that lasted less than 10 minutes. Total destruction. In the medical bay, Shin Unji was monitoring the emergency channels. She heard the voices of people who were dying. She heard a doctor on one of the colonies trying to describe injuries she had never seen before. Injuries caused by weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. She heard children screaming. And then she heard nothing, because the channel went dead. Unji did something that would change everything. She took every recording, every image, every piece of data that had come through the emergency channels, and she broadcast it on every human frequency in the galaxy. Every ship, every station, every colony, every outpost. She sent it all. The screams, the images of burning cities, the silence that came after. She wanted every human being alive to see what had been done to them. And they saw. The galaxy expected humans to react the way other species reacted when they were attacked. They expected panic. They expected desperate calls to the Galactic Council for help. They expected crying and begging, and the slow, broken surrender of a species that had never learned how to fight back. That was what always happened when a peaceful species was struck by a military power. It was the natural order of things. But humans did not panic. They did not cry. They did not beg. They went quiet. Every human ship in the galaxy stopped transmitting at the same time. Every colony went dark. Every station, every outpost, every civilian vessel. Total silence. It was as if the entire species had taken one deep breath and held it. The other species in the galaxy noticed, and for the first time, some of them felt something they had never felt when looking at humans before. They felt afraid. On the bridge of the Baiko, Do-hyun stood very still. Nari watched him, waiting for orders. The crew was silent. Everyone was looking at their captain. Do-hyun stared at the image of New Busan, the planet he had looked at with warmth just 2 days ago. The green oceans were gone. The white beaches were gone. The children who played in the narrow streets were gone. 4 million lives, erased in 9 minutes by an enemy that thought humans were soft. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Not the calm of peace. The calm of a man who had just watched the last reason he had for being gentle burn away to nothing. "Contact Fleet Command," he said. "Tell them we are awaiting orders." Nari nodded and turned to her console. As she sent the message, she noticed something on the tactical display that made her blood go cold. Across human space, ships were moving. Not running away, not scattering in panic. They were moving toward each other, forming up, coming together like a fist closing. Ships that had not been armed in decades were powering up weapons that had been sealed behind locked doors for generations. And they were all heading in the same direction, toward the Vren. The silence was not grief. It was not shock. It was not fear. It was the silence of something very old and very dangerous, waking up after a very long sleep. And by the time the Vren realized what that silence meant, the stars had been quiet for a long time. That was the first thing anyone said when they talked about humans. They were quiet. They were polite. They smiled at every alien species they met, shook hands, or tentacles, or whatever else was offered, and they never raised their voices. For nearly 200 years, humanity had been the friendliest species in the galaxy, and most aliens thought that was all there was to them. Captain Han Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the deep space carrier Baiko and looked out at the blackness beyond the viewport. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a calm face that never showed much of anything. He had served in the fleet for 22 years, and in all that time, he had never fired a weapon at another living thing. None of them had. The fleet existed because the Galactic Council required every member species to maintain a defense force, and humanity had followed the rule without complaint. But the truth was, nobody on the Beko expected to ever fight anyone. Their job was to patrol the outer colonies, check on mining stations, and make sure cargo ships were not being bothered by pirates. It was boring work, and Do-hyun liked it that way. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Yoon Nari, walked onto the bridge carrying 2 cups of coffee. She was shorter than him by a full head, with sharp eyes, and a habit of speaking her mind even when nobody asked. She set 1 cup on the edge of his console and leaned against the railing beside him. "Another day of nothing," she said. Do-hyun picked up the coffee and took a slow sip. "Nothing is good. Nothing is boring. Boring keeps people alive." Nari smiled at that, but did not argue. She had heard him say it 100 times. It was something close to a philosophy for him. He believed that the best version of humanity was the one that had put away its weapons and learned to sit still. He had read the old history files from Earth, the ones about the wars that had nearly ended everything. He had seen the images of burned cities and poisoned rivers and fields of bones. Humanity had done terrible things to itself before it ever left its home planet, and Do-hyun was glad those days were over. Down in the lower decks, the crew went about their routines. Sergeant Ko Ji-won ran drills with the ground team, not because anyone expected them to fight, but because the regulations said they had to. Ji-won was a big man with a loud voice and a surprisingly gentle way of talking when the drills were done. He trained his soldiers to be sharp, but he also knew most of them had joined the fleet for the travel benefits and the steady pay. War was a word in a history book to them, nothing more. In the medical bay, Shin Eun-ji checked her supplies and updated her logs. She was the ship's chief medic, a woman with steady hands and a quiet voice. She had treated broken bones, fevers, allergic reactions to alien food, and one memorable case of a crewman who had accidentally glued his hand to a console. She had never treated a combat wound. She did not expect to. The Beko drifted along its patrol route, passing the outer colony of New Busan. It was one of humanity's farthest settlements, a planet with green oceans and white sand that reminded people of the old Korean coastline back on Earth. Nearly 4 million people lived there. They fished, they farmed, they built schools and hospitals and small towns with narrow streets where children played in the evenings. It was a peaceful place, and the people who lived there had chosen it because they wanted a simple life, far from the noise of the inner worlds. Do-hyun looked at the planet on his screen and felt the small warmth he always felt when he saw a human colony thriving. This was what it was all about. Not power, not territory, just people building lives in quiet corners of the universe. The galactic community had welcomed humanity easily enough. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But they were friendly, and they were useful. They traded fairly. They sent aid when other species had disasters. They sat quietly in council meetings and voted with reason instead of anger. Some of the older species found them a little dull. Others thought they were hiding something. But most simply accepted humans as pleasant neighbors who caused no trouble. The Vren Dominion had a different opinion. Nobody on the Beko knew much about the Vren. They were a military empire on the far side of the galaxy, aggressive and proud. They had fought several wars with other species over the past century, and won most of them. They believed in strength. They believed that the universe belonged to those willing to take it. And they had been watching humanity for a long time. To the Vren, humans were weak. They had all this space, all these colonies, and they did not even arm them properly. Their fleet was small. Their soldiers had never seen combat. They were soft, like fruit left too long in the sun. The Vren High Command had discussed them many times, and the conclusion was always the same. Humans would be easy to break. Their worlds would be easy to take. And once the galaxy saw how easily humanity fell, the Vren would rise in power and respect. There had been warnings. The Galactic Council had told the Vren in very clear language to leave humanity alone. Several older species had sent private messages to the Vren leadership, messages that were less polite and more direct. One of them, from a species that had known humans since their earliest days in space, simply said, "You do not understand what you are looking at." The Vren ignored all of it. They saw a species that smiled too much and fought too little, and they made their plans. On the bridge of the Baiko, Do-hyun finished his coffee and set the cup down. Nari had gone back to her station. The crew was calm. The stars were still. He did not know that in 48 hours, everything he believed about peace would be torn apart. He did not know that the quiet life he loved was about to end in fire. He did not know that the galaxy was about to learn something that the oldest species already knew, but had never said out loud. Humanity was not peaceful because it was weak. Humanity was peaceful because it remembered what it was capable of, and that memory scared it more than anything in the universe. The calm was not going to last, and when it broke, the galaxy would never be the same again. Do-hyun looked at the stars one more time and thought about how beautiful they were. Then he went to bed, not knowing it was the last quiet night he would ever have.